What if we could use the technology of the future to solve one of the most stubborn problems in our justice system? Today, we're diving into a fascinating research blueprint that asks a really bold question. Can we actually use virtual reality to break the cycle of juvenile reoffending? Okay, let's get into it.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we're going to get a handle on the real scale of the problem. Then, we'll explore this pretty innovative VR solution that's being proposed. After that, we'll dig into the scientific plan to test it, see how researchers can actually simulate its potential impact, and finally, take a look at what this all could mean for the future of justice.
All right, first up, we really need to understand the challenge we're facing. It's called the revolving door, and for a very, very good reason. I mean, this is the question, isn't it? It's something that keeps policymakers, social workers, and entire communities up at night. When a young person leaves the justice system, the hope, the goal, is for them to build a new life. But, way too often, that's just not what happens.
So get this. Depending on where you are and exactly how it's measured, some studies show that a staggering 60 to 75% of young people who leave the justice system will reoffend within just a few years. And that's not just a statistic, right? That number represents a whole cycle of lost potential and a massive, massive challenge for our society. The technical term for this whole revolving door phenomenon is recidivism. Basically, the tendency for someone to relapse into criminal behavior. And breaking this cycle, well, that's the #1 goal of any truly effective rehabilitation program.
So how in the world do you tackle a problem that's so persistent? Well, some researchers are turning to a tool that you might find pretty unexpected: virtual reality.
At the very heart of this innovative new approach is a simple but really powerful idea. What if you could use technology to help young offenders develop empathy? What if you could help them understand on a deep, gut level the impact of their actions from someone else's point of view?
Now, traditional methods like counseling and group therapy, they're absolutely vital. But VR offers something fundamentally different. See, instead of just talking about a situation, it lets someone experience it. This ability to create immersive, perspective-taking situations in a totally safe and controlled environment, that's what makes this approach so incredibly unique.
But listen, a great idea is just the start. The source material we're digging into today isn't a final study with all the results. No, it's a comprehensive blueprint for how to find out if this thing actually works. It's all about building a rigorous scientific plan from the ground up.
The plan is broken down into 3 really logical phases. First, you've got to understand the current situation. Who is most at risk? Second, you need to figure out exactly what data to collect to see if the VR training is even having an effect. And third, and this is super cool, you simulate the potential outcomes to see if this is even worth pursuing on a huge scale.
So, phase 1 is all about understanding the landscape. Using data that's already out there, researchers can build a statistical model to figure out the strongest predictors of reoffending. They'll look at things like a history of violence, prosocial behaviors, which are just those positive, helpful actions, and even cultural context. This helps them zero in on who is most at risk and, maybe, who could benefit the most from an intervention like this.
Okay, so once you know who to target, you have to know if your intervention is working. That's what phase 2 is all about, the data collection plan. It lays out exactly what to measure in a future real-world trial. Things like, how much VR training did they get? Did their empathy scores actually change? And, here's the big one, did they reoffend within 6 months? That last piece of data, coming straight from official records, is the ultimate test of success.
This next phase is where the blueprint gets really futuristic. Instead of waiting years for trial data to roll in, researchers can actually model what might happen. Now, this might sound super complex, but the idea is actually pretty simple. Think of it like a weather forecast, but for social policy. By using a method called a Monte Carlo simulation, researchers can run a scenario thousands and thousands of times, each time with slightly different variables. By looking at all these possible futures, they can get a pretty good estimate of the most likely outcomes of the VR program before a single person even participates. It's an incredibly powerful way to test an idea on a massive scale without the real-world costs.
So, what are these simulations actually testing? Well, they're running specific if-then scenarios, or hypotheses. For example, if the VR program makes prosocial behavior go up by 10%, then we might see a 5% drop in recidivism. Or if it brings down self-reported violence by 15%, recidivism could drop by 8%. They can even test why it might be working, like modeling whether empathy is really the key ingredient driving that change.
So, what's the bottom line from running all these simulations?
Well, the research framework predicts that a VR empathy intervention could potentially reduce juvenile recidivism by anywhere from 5 to 18%. Now, to put that into perspective, a reduction of that size could translate to thousands of lives changed and huge savings in public resources every single year. That is a tangible and potentially life-altering impact.
So, with a promising simulation in hand, what happens next? Where do we go from here?
It is so crucial to remember that this is a framework for discovery. It is not a finished product. Before any of this could even be considered as policy, it would need years and years of rigorous, real-world testing. In fact, the plan itself calls for extensive checks to make sure any positive findings are solid and reliable.
Yeah, the road ahead is a long one. Researchers still need to figure out if these programs are even cost-effective. They need to study the long-term effects beyond just a few months. And critically, as you see here, they have to run fairness audits to make sure these tools are applied equitably and don't end up creating new biases in the system.
So this blueprint doesn't give us the final answer, but it does offer a clear scientific path to finding one. It challenges all of us to consider that the tools to solve some of our oldest social problems, well, they might be found in a world that we're really just beginning to build. The question still stands, could the future of rehabilitation actually be virtual? Thanks to rigorous research plans like this, we're on our way to finding out.